Hello and welcome to another episode of Write to Publish with me, Karen Stanley. Lovely to have you listening in, whether you're listening on the Thursday when the podcast episodes go out, or whether you're listening later in the week, early in the morning over your breakfast, or late in the evening with a glass of wine. One and all, you are welcome, welcome, welcome. So this week I wanted to talk to you about character profiling. If you're writing a novel, your characters are crucial. Characters are what will drive your plot forward. Characters are what will determine your story arc. Characters will kind of dictate events and how events unfold. And really, that's not rocket science, is it? You can't really have a story without characters if you're writing a novel, of course, because without characters, not much is going to happen. So your characters are really a key, integral part of your story overall. Generally, in a story, you will have at least one protagonist and one antagonist. Your protagonist is effectively your goodie, and your antagonist, I always try and get these the right way around. I sometimes muddle them up. Your antagonist, who's antagonizing, is really your baddie. So that's the person who's causing conflict, who's causing friction. If you think about when you watch, I don't watch them very much, but I know a lot of people love the soap operas. There's always people in there upsetting the apple cart, isn't there? There's always people causing friction, because that's really what makes a good story. And if you think about your story arc, you've got to have things going wrong and things happening in order for you to move the story forward, but in order for your story to be a bit more interesting. If nothing controversial happens, if no friction occurs, if no kind of calamities or love interests, or if nothing kind of is going on in your story, you've got to really ask yourself whether anybody's going to be even mildly interested in reading that story, or whether your story in itself is going to be mildly interesting. So your characters are a key part, and getting these right will be crucial to the development of your story. Obviously, your characters will vary depending on the genre of your story. So if you're writing a horror story, for example, it's highly likely that your baddie is going to have some kind of supernatural power, or perhaps they're going to be slightly fantastical in nature, or they're going to have a dark past, or they're going to have some really awful secret that kind of reveals itself as the story goes on. If your story is like a romance story, for example, your protagonist is going to be the goodie who kind of saves the day and, wins the girl or wins the guy. And your antagonist might be someone who's looking to cause friction in that relationship. It might be the torrid affair, the bit on the side, for want of another word. So it will be very genre specific as to what your characters are like and how they react, interact with each other, and how they drive your plot forward. So, of course, these tips that I'm giving you tonight about character development will be quite generic, and they'll need to be sort of fine-tuned depending on your story genre. Not really rocket science, but obviously worth a mention. So when I'm writing a story, particularly if I'm thinking about my characters, thinking about my plot, I get to know my characters so well that I actually go to bed dreaming about them. Call me weird if you like. I can't hear you if you do that, so you're quite at liberty to do that. But when I wrote 1 Year at the Dog and Duck, and most of my books, to be fair, are very character driven. I'm very interested in people. I'm very interested in the relationships between people, particularly relationships that develop from unknown, kind of unexpected circumstances. So circumstances where characters are almost thrown together and the relationships develop because of the situation rather than the fact that they've met and become friends. I'm quite interested in, colleagues who become friends, or when I wrote Tarts with Darts, that was the idea. Was I wanted to bring all these different characters together, people who may not have met otherwise, but they met because they had a shared interest of darts, and they became members of the ladies darts team, and that's how they started their interactions and built their relationships with each other. So for me, I'm very interested in how people form relationships and the circumstances that lead them to become connected in a way that they might not have done by by design. So it's happened by accident. That's just my kind of, what should we call it? My kind of MO, really. That's how I write my characters. So when I'm creating my kind of character-driven novels, and I'm thinking of 1 Year at the Dog and Duck here, again, I set it in a pub because there's huge opportunity for different people to come and go. A pub's a really great meeting place. It's a melting pot of people, isn't it? You've got a guy at the bar drowning his sorrows over his latest divorce or his latest beau running off with the next door neighbour. You've got the couple who come in every week and don't speak to each other, or you've got the couple who come in and smooch in the corner, or you've got the local kind of tradesman, the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker who drink in the pub. It's a brilliant opportunity to bring lots of unexpected people together, to look at how those relationships develop, to look at how they bounce off each other. A pub's a great place for friction, isn't there? Fill a few people with alcohol and who knows what will happen. So that was the reason I chose the pub. One, because I wanted to write that storyline, but also I knew it gave me endless opportunity for different characters to come and go and for different character relationships to develop. So however you bring your characters together, it's worth thinking about why and how that's feasible. So you're not likely, I don't know, I can't think of anything, you're not likely to trip over an astronaut in the full gear in your local pub, are you? Ridiculous example, but you get the idea. You've got to think about the ways in which you're going to bring those characters together, which is believable and relevant to the genre. Again, so going back to my horror example, it's unlikely, if you're writing a horror story, that everybody in that story is a paragon of virtue. Is really kind and gives money to charity, because how's it going to be a horror story? So you've got to think about how to make it realistic and why and how those people are going to come into your story. So going back to what I was saying earlier, when I was writing 1 Year at the Dog and Duck, I would go to bed dreaming about my characters. Kim, my main character, she is a reluctant landlady rather. She inherits a pub. Her feckless husband drags her off to this pub, more or less forces her to run the pub. She don't really want to be there. She doesn't really like it. And it's about how she falls in love with the place, really, and the different characters that she meets and the relationships that she has with them and how her life unfolds. Typically my writing is fairly satirical, bit of humour, bit of love interest in there, but that's just my style. But whilst I was writing this book, I would go to bed dreaming about Kim, thinking about, oh, I wonder what Kim would say to that. She became a real person in my head. And I would argue that if you don't know your characters that well, then it's going to be much harder for you to write their story. Really, that's what it's about. You are writing their story in their absence. So it's important that at the very least, your antagonist and your protagonist, like old friends. Okay. So things that you should know about them. You should know their family history. You should know, whether they've got siblings. You should know whether they're married, divorced, remarried, gay, straight, got several lovers on the go, whether they're promiscuous, whether they're celibate, whether they're saving themselves for marriage. You should know what their favourite food is, whether they, I don't know, I use this example quite a lot. It doesn't matter that your protagonist hates Brussels sprouts. The reader doesn't really need to know that. But if you know that as the writer, you'll know that when the protagonist gets invited to the Christmas work party and is put in front of a turkey dinner complete with all the trimmings, that those Brussels sprouts might be a bit of a trigger for her because of a terrible memory of something that happened in childhood. I'm being a bit ridiculous, but you can see how knowing that much about your character will give you some real insights into how your character will react or respond in certain situations. Does that make sense? I hope so. So you might not even ever tell your reader that your character hates Brussels sprouts, but your reader will be going, oh my God, she kicked off at the Christmas party. I wonder why she did that. Do you see what I mean? You can start to help the story unfold by knowing a lot about your character. So you should know about their family history. You should know about siblings, partners, all of that kind of thing. You should know about their likes and dislikes. You should know about secret talents or fears that they've got. Have they got any phobias? Are they terrified of heights? That might not be that relevant. However, as your story unfolds, I don't know if you're writing a spooky story and your protagonist is running away from the antagonist who's chasing them, and he suddenly finds themselves running up a flight of stairs and they're abandoned on the top floor of an old building. The fact that she or he doesn't like heights is going to really influence how they respond in that situation, why they might jump off the building, why they might not, you know. So knowing all of that about your character before you start writing will not only help you to drive your plot forward, but it will also help you to unpick your story. It will help you to write sort of turns of events. Because again, I talk to people about planning, I talk to people about being a pantser. And whilst it's a good idea to have a plan, sometimes the beauty comes when your story almost goes off at a tangent that you as the writer didn't quite see coming, that you as the writer didn't expect. But because you're so immersed in your story, you know where you want the story to go and you know your characters really well. Sometimes that creativity can really kick in and your characters will almost guide you. And that's when some real beautiful moments will happen. But that won't happen if you don't know your characters really well. It's almost like putting in the destination in your sat nav, going to a certain journey. You know you're heading north, for example, but you notice that there's a really lovely little scenic route that you can go round. It's a little bit of a detour, but you and your passenger love to look at the Kent countryside, for example, and you know that this will take you past a particularly beautiful bit of forest. I'm making this up literally as I go along, but you know that you can go off down that little path and come back to join the main journey again, but you've had that lovely little detour. Now, the reason you can take that detour is because you know where you're going, you've put it in your sat nav, you've got your plan, you know your destination, but you also know that area fairly well, so you can take yourself off that little detour, securing the knowledge that you can bring yourself back to the main path. So I hope that's making some kind of sense. But really what I'm trying to say to you is, if you don't know your characters like old friends, then your story will be the worse for it. Okay. Another way to get really good ideas for characters is just people watching, really. I mean, being a bit of a nosy Parker is a great thing. Try to be discreet. Don't stare open-mouthed agog at people because you're likely to be on the receiving end of a bop on the nose. But you can do it discreetly without looking like you're gawping at people. And obviously, if you do base any characters that you write about on someone that you've met, be careful that you don't make them identifiable. You can change them for the purposes of fiction. But have a look at people when you're wandering around the supermarket, when you're sitting on a park bench. Look at how people interact with each other. Look not only at their physical features, and I love to look at couples and think, oh, I wouldn't have put them two together. They don't look like they go together. I wonder what it is that's drawn them together. I wonder what their common ground is. I wonder what their shared interests are. So looking at people, observing people in different situations and different social settings will give you a really good idea of how people interact with each other and how people engage with each other and how people respond to certain situations. So people watching is a great one. And look at films as well. Watch a film or read a book and look at how the author or how the writer develops that character, how they tell you information about the character without giving everything away, or how they set the scene with their character and you think, do you know what, I know what she's going to do in this instance, because she really hates that and she's going to go nuts when she finds out about that kind of X, Y and Z. So thinking about knowing all of that backstory, knowing all of what your character feels, how your character responds, what your character's strengths and weaknesses are, will help you to unveil them, to reveal them more in your story, and help them to drive your plot forward and to add interest to your story. So my advice to you today is, make sure you know your characters well. Brainstorm everything you can possibly think about them, not just their physical attributes, but their loves, their fears, their hates, their desires, their wants, their talents, their friendships, their personality traits, their darkest secrets, their biggest flaws, all of that. Get to know them really, really well. And even if you don't share all of that information, and I would strongly recommend that you don't bombard your reader with, oh, and by the way, did you know my character hates Brussels sprouts? You only want to introduce that if it's relevant at that point in the story. But the more you know your characters, the more they will drive your plot forward, the better they will lead you as you tell your story, because you're telling it as if you were chatting about a friend. Think about when we gossip. We all gossip and we say, oh, you never guess what so and so did at that party. And if you know so and so at that party really well, you can embellish your story a little bit and you'll never guess what she said. And I knew she was going to say that because I know this about her. You know, this is how you're going to think about your story unfolding. So know your characters really well. And if you want inspiration for characters, watch films, read books, and do a bit of people watching and look at the way, really start to look at it critically, you know, how people interact with each other. Go to the pub. I mean, I've done this so many times. My husband will roll his eyes at me. But I remember being in a pub once with my husband, and there were a couple on the table behind me, and they were clearly having an argument, but the argument was so bizarre. She had a really high pitched sort of voice, and she was giving him what for. And he sat there sort of silently with his head stooped, writing in some strange little notebook that was bound together by a little piece of elastic and looked like it was a million years old. And the only way he responded was with sort of hushed whispers. Now, these two people, without knowing it, were fabulous characters. And my husband was like, stop listening, stop listening. I was like, I can't help it. You know, they were arguing. I think they were arguing about whether you could buy something in one supermarket for 2p less than you could buy it in another supermarket. I mean, the argument was so bizarre in itself, and the way they were responding to each other was really bizarre. And this argument went on for ages, but they never left. They stayed, even though they were more or less telling each other that they hated each other's guts. They still stayed and had their meal and sat at this table. So I got so much material from that unsuspecting couple. Obviously, I didn't, you know, I would never, I don't know their names anyway, but the inspiration I got and the kind of cues that I got as a writer for how people engage, how people respond in arguments. You know, one person might be really passive and shut themselves away. Another person might be really vocal, but actually have less power over the really passive person. It was just hugely fascinating. So if you're not sure, go and sit in a pub quietly, pretend you're a bit Inspector Clouseau, pretend you're reading your newspaper or scrolling on your phone, and just keep an ear out for how people respond. You know, watch how people kind of greet each other, where people choose to sit, how people kind of engage with their surroundings. Hugely, and if nothing else, it's fascinating as heck and will give you loads of inspiration and motivation for character development. And think about your favorite characters. Think about, you know, Cruella de Vil. Think about Poirot. Think about characters who are almost caricatures of themselves, and look at how the author or how the writer has developed that character to become someone that we know, love, understand, misunderstand, all of the above. So I hope that's given you some inspiration and a bit of motivation. I look forward to hearing your comments. If you want to get in touch, do please DM me. You can find me at Mabel and Stanley Publishing on Facebook, Instagram. I'm on LinkedIn as Karen Stanley. If you get stuck with character profiling, send me a DM. I'm very nosy, very interested in people. So I'd love to hear your character profiles. Similarly, if you get stuck or you want a bit of inspiration or you just want to kind of bit of a brainstorm, I'm on board with that too. So I wish you well with your character development. Don't forget to get in touch if you want to have some advice, want to share some of your writing, or if you want to find other ways to work with me, if you're looking for some accountability, some inspiration, some motivation, and a way to keep your writing on track, please do get in touch. It's lovely chatting with you all as per usual, and I hope you'll tune in again next week. Take care. This was Karen Stanley, Right to Publish. Listen to you all again soon. Thank you.